There's so much that I would like to share with you, and there's so little time to do it in. What do I give and what do I leave? That's the difficulty that I have. It was the tone in my mother's voice that pulled me back to reality. She was yelling out at me, "Catch!" Dad had sent me where we were working in the field, sent me into the house to fetch something. And when Dad normally sends you, you had to do it at double pace. So I ran into the kitchen to get through to the rest of the house. I'd been grappling with some personal issues. I'd just broken up with a girlfriend that I thought that I was going to get married to. And we'd broken up because I just realized that our relationship was not going to be a good relationship. And I went home for the holidays to my parents. But deep down, I was wrestling with the decisions that I was making. And I guess Mum had seen it. And as I ran into the kitchen, she yelled out, "Catch!" And as I looked up, the potato was right there. I ducked and I grabbed it without asking where it came from. But I very soon realized that it has been in the boiling hot water for quite a while. Ladies and gentlemen, you know that hot potatoes do not lose its heat very quickly. So as I held it, it started to burn my hands. And I knew that the option of dropping it was no option. I was taught not to waste with food. So I started to juggle with a potato. But the more I juggled, the more it kept burning my hands. And I knew that I was in trouble. I needed to do something fast. So I threw it back at Mum, who caught it, and she put it down next to the stove. And she looked at me and she said, "Son, you cannot help that others throw hot potatoes at you. But if you catch it, remember it is your hands that will burn." And with that, Mum turned around and she continued to cook. I walked away from there wondering what the lesson was that Mum was trying to teach me. Mum had never gone past year 8 at school. But she has taught me the most valuable lesson in life, far valuable than what any of my professors at university has ever taught me in clinical work. You see, my friends, I've come to the realization that each one of us, as we go through life, are catching other people's hot potatoes. And as we catch them, other people's problems that they throw at us, as we catch them, because of our own upbringing, because of what we hold in our own baggage, we often hold on to those hot potatoes without questioning whom it belongs to. Are you with me? Do you realize what I'm referring to as hot potatoes? So as Dad had an inability to validate me, because Dad had an inability to make me feel not only that he loved me, but also that he liked me, I accepted that hot potato that really was born out of his own rejection experience as a child. I took hold of those hot potatoes and I carried it with me for many, many years. With it, I added so many other people's hot potatoes. I actually walked around with arms full of hot potatoes, which was burning my life every day. I never even considered to take each potato out and ask the question whether it truly belonged to me or not. How many hot potatoes do you carry around with you? Maybe it is time that you stand still and ask yourself this question. Why do I have this discomfort? Why am I so reactive? Does this hot potato really belong to me? And if you find that the hot potato that you're looking at does not carry your name, why not just drop it? You don't need to throw it back. You don't need to blame others for the hurt and the injury that has happened in your life. Because most probably they are hurting you because they themselves were hurt before. Why not just drop it and ask that God's grace and love will not only bring healing in your life, but also in the life of others. It is amazing what you can do if you dedicate your painful past to God in service. I've dedicated my life, my past, to God, in service of God, for Him to be used to bring healing to other people. And so often as I sit in the counseling room working with people, they would say to me, David, why is it that you speak our language? You know where we come from. You know what we're hurting. You're not like others that come from a textbook experience. Maybe there's a sense, there's a reason why God sometimes allows us to go through pain. I learned a lesson out of the last chapter of the book of Genesis where Joseph met his brothers after they had just buried their father. They now realized that there is no restraint to him anymore. He now can pay them back. Their father's out of the way. They've just buried him. And they send a messenger to Joseph and they plead with him saying, our father said before he died. By the way, I never read that. It's never written up if he really did say that. Our father said before he died that you should forgive us and not harm us. They eventually come with exactly the same message, standing in front of him, expressing that, pleading with him. And Joseph weeps. And he says, am I in the place of God? You have meant to harm me. Listen to the next. But God has used it to save many a nation alive. The hot potatoes that has been thrown at you, in God's hands, my friends, can become a mighty instrument of healing and ministry to other people. Think about that. A young nurse comes to see me. She had just discovered that her father was sexually abusing a 5-year-old little girl. The complication here is that her father, which is the grandfather to a 5-year-old little girl, is also the father of her child. Can you work that one out? So her father abused her and fathered his own grandchild. once we got her into a safe place, I started to work with her. And the day came that she said to me, how will I ever be able to claim my life back? I've been hurt since childhood. I've been used and abused since childhood. Now I've discovered that my father is doing the same to my child. How will I ever be able to move forward? The day came that I challenged her with a story of Joseph, and I said that the only way that you can break free from your broken past is to hand your brokenness into the hand of God. She says to me, how does this look like? And I share with her part of my story and what I do. I said, I want you to go and pray about this. A few weeks later, she comes back into my office and she said, I have just signed up to go back to university. I said, what are you going to study? She says, I'm going to study social work. I said, for what purpose? She says, I want to work with females that have been sexually abused. I want to share with them my story and the healing that happens because of what Jesus done in my life. I want them to help them to overcome their hurt by the grace of God. Is she still a victim? No, my friend, she's not a victim anymore. She's actually a victor. She has outgrown the hurt and the pain of her life. And that you can do as well with God's grace. Tonight's subject that we're going to focus on is when others don't see things your way. It's difficult, isn't it? If I'm using the Hellenistic model, is it important then that others see things my way? Very much so. The Hellenistic model is my model of self-worth and self-value. Then I need to act so that others will be controlled and they will speak the same language as what I do. But, my friend, if the Hebrew model is my model of self and self-worth and value, then it doesn't matter what others think and believe. Because there's only one individual that speaks my worth and my value, and that is God. I don't need their approval. I can, in actual fact, respect the fact that they are individuals separate from me. There are certain things that impacts our ability to allow people that freedom. And I'd like to very briefly share with you a few statements about irrational thinking that keeps us from understanding others. Irrational thinking. What is that? We often have an overgeneralized thinking. We exaggerate. For example, in a marital relationship, we say, he will never consider my opinions. You are always just hurting me. You never agree with me. We overgeneralize. And when we do that, we have an inability to see the growth that God can work in people's lives. Another one is making an assumption and running with it. Jumping to conclusions is a form of making assumptions and acting on it as if it were true. A third one is fortune telling. Projecting your assumption on future events based on what happened in the past. We say, I bet that this will happen again. I know this person, he's going to act this way again. So when we deal with conflict, do we really give that person an opportunity to change their mind? No, we've already made up our mind what they're going to choose. Another way is focusing on the other person's behavior in the past, not the present. Some people live so much in their hurt and their pain of the past that they do not realize that another person has already changed or is even trying to change. I have seen relationships break up because a partner is unwilling to see the work of God and the change that God is bringing in their partner's life. What a great blessing it has been for me, as my wife from time to time can recognize and say to me, I can see Jesus at work in your life. That my kids can see and say to my wife, not to me, Mummy, I can see that Daddy is spending time with Jesus. I can see the change. Another is piggybacking, bring up old issues from the past during an argument. We say things like, you have been doing this to me for so many years. And as you try to work out issues, try to look for solutions, the other person just brings up past events. And it just crushes your soul because your relationship is going nowhere. It happens in churches, friends. It happens in churches. I've sat at church boards where the old things of a person's past been brought up. The person has long ago moved forward in their life, brought about by God's grace transformation in their life, but the church still doesn't see it. Another one, irrational thinking, is closed mind thinking. Don't tell me anything, I know best. I know how this person is going to act. Stubborn insistence on one's own opinion without taking in information from others can be a setup for rigidity in life. And there's many more, but I'm going to finish with this one because I don't want to keep you for another hour and a half tonight. Black and white thinking, there's no middle ground. Others are seen as either totally bad or totally good. There is no understanding of where the other person is coming from. Always leads to a lose-lose situation. And can I suggest this to you, that if you win in an argument with someone, you've in actual fact lost in terms of the relationship. You can sometimes be 100% correct in the information that you share, but you can be 100% wrong from a relational perspective. Jesus had that ability to confront, but to still care. And on Sabbath, the sermon will center about one of those occasions where Jesus confronted, but the person walked away knowing that they had hope and there was a future. I just wonder what would happen in our churches if we could model that method that Jesus had demonstrated to us. Tonight, if you have a piece of paper and a pen to write with, I would like to give you the formula of change. The formula that you can in actual fact do therapy on yourself. The formula that you can use to analyze your own thinking and challenge your own thinking and come to a realization to why you are acting the way that you do, and then to correct yourself. It is called the cognitive behavioral therapy model, which says, and here's the formula that says A plus B equals C, but don't forget about D and E. That's the formula. If you practice this formula, you'll be able to sort yourself out. The question is, what does it mean? Well, let me use a very simple illustration. There's an activating event. 2 of you walked through the back door tonight. And as you walked in, the two of you looked at me straight in the eyes, you turned to each other, and you started to laugh. So, C is the emotional consequence or the emotional conclusion that I jumped to. What is the conclusion that I jumped to? You must have spoken about me. You're laughing at me. You're making fun of me. Friends, notice this. My sequence in my program is not working well. It says, but don't forget about D and E. What does D stand for? It says dispute the validity of B. You see, what has happened in this occasion is that I have jumped from A to C. I have ignored B. What is B standing for? It is the belief system behind my thinking. I see two people walk through the front door. They look at me, they turn to each other, and they start to laugh. There's a belief that has led me to this emotional conclusion that I came to. The question is that belief necessarily true that has led to that emotional conclusion? What might be that belief? That people think that I might be stupid. Is that belief true? Not necessarily. The reality is that two people might have been busy as they walked through the front door. Relax, people, none of you had done that. So I'm just using it as an example. Two people might have been sharing something comically outside, and as they were coming in, they saw me, but they did not even register because they were so much in the process of sharing the story. And right at that moment, they looked at each other and they laughed. Not at me, but at the situation that they were sharing. So I jumped from A to C. I work out what is B, and I need to go and rectify it in my brain and say to myself, everyone that looks at me and laughs at me does not necessarily make fun of me. And therefore, I need to constantly always evaluate and constantly process my thinking. My wife comes to me and she says, David, can we please have a look at our bank statement? And I pull up the bank statement and I can feel this emotion rising within me. You already know the story. And she breathes into my neck as she glares into the screen of the computer, and her hand shoots forward and she says, oh, what was that amount for? What was that paid out for? And immediately I feel what? I feel accused. I feel as though she must be thinking that I'm wasting her money, and I want to explode by emotional consequence. But is it necessarily based upon a correct belief system? What is the belief system based upon? It's based upon the events of my childhood that has happened between my parents, not between my wife and I, but I project the events of my past into my current relationship. I need to take the step back and say, wait a minute, this belief system that has led to this is not necessarily the truth. And I can go and check it. So I turn to my wife and I say to her, Constance, tell me, where's this questioning coming from? What are you trying to get at? Oh, I'm just disappointed that there's not enough money. But don't you mean that to say that I've wasted our money. No. I know that those transactions was transactions that I made, not you. I'm not blaming you. But the emotional conclusion that I jumped to was all about thinking that she is thinking that of me. So friends, I often sit down with a client in my office and they are battling irrational thinking. And I just write on a piece of paper this formula and I say to them, right, let's work out what is the activating event? What is the emotional conclusion that you jump to? C. But wait a minute, let's look at the belief system. When a father or a stepfather sexually abuses his daughter and she feels that it must be because she has no value, that is why he's done that. Is that an irrational or rational belief? It's an irrational belief which needs to be rectified in a mind. When parents divorce, it is often the child that lives with a lifelong guilt and shame in their life, thinking that if I only had value, mum and dad would have stayed together. Is it rational or irrational? It's irrational. So they need to confront that belief system that has led them into the shame and this guilt, and they need to speak the truth. The fact that parents divorce has nothing to do with the child. It has everything to do with the parents that has an inability to reconcile those issues, and most probably because they themselves also carry irrational beliefs within them. So the point tonight that I want to bring us to is, do we always necessarily see things in exactly the same way? I want you to look at that picture. Can you see a face in that picture? What kind of face do you see? A young face, a young lady looking away. Is that right? Who sees a young lady's face that looks away in that picture? Who sees another face in that picture? You see another face, you as well, and you. What kind of face do you see in that picture? An old face of an old lady. Can you all see it? Can you see it? Is there anyone that can't see it? Friends, here's the face of the young lady with her hair, her nose and her eyebrows, her jawline and her ears. But if you have a new look at it, you'll see an old lady with her crooked nose, her mouth, and her eye. Not all of us see things necessarily the same. Two people can look at the same scenario, the same issue, and have two different opinions about it. And most probably that is the reason why two people are drawn to each other, is because they are so different. But once they get married, I expect that my wife has to see things exactly my way. And if she doesn't, there's an irritation that builds up. Conflict starts. We are attracted to people out there in the community because they think different to us. But the moment they become part of our church, what do we expect them to be? Exactly copycats of us. I think heaven is going to be a very boring place if everyone must think the way that I think. I'm not talking here about principal issues. I'm not talking here about right and wrong. I'm talking here about general life things. We suddenly expect everyone to be exactly the same. I want to take you into the Bible to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19 to 23, and just share with you what Paul says about this. Paul says, reading from verse 19 of 1 Corinthians 9:19, I'm reading out of the New King James translation. It says, "For though I am free from all men, I've made myself a servant to all, that I might win them all. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law towards God, but under the law towards Christ, that I might win those who are without law." Let me stop there just for a brief second. So I set up, on behalf of the church, an agency in Cabramatta in 1999, which at that stage was the drug capital of Australia. It was a war zone. I set up a centre there to reach the unreachable of that society. On Sabbath, I would, after my sermon, instead of going home, I would go to the streets of Cabramatta. I would take off my tie, my jacket, my white shirt I would leave on, and my black pants, black shoes, and I would wander the streets of Cabramatta, and I would see a drug addict sitting there or half lying in the gutters of the street. I would sit down right next to them and talk to them. Why did I do that? Did I also mix up the drugs, the heroin, and shoot up with them? No, I didn't. But I did not disassociate with them. I associated with them for what purpose? To draw them to Christ. I can still remember the community, the people of the community of Cabramatta walking past, looking down in disgust that I would associate myself with a drug addict. But as I eventually would stand up, the drug addict would stagger up themselves and follow me into our centre that opens its doors at 3 o'clock Sabbath afternoon. Yes, we were open on Sabbath, but we were open with a different purpose to what we were open during the week. The whole atmosphere was different. And as we would sit down and my staff would start to serve them with something to drink, the client would turn to me and say, "You were not ashamed of me out there, were you?" No. I want to know what makes you different to the world out there. It must be your God that makes you different. Please tell me and introduce me to your God. I remember a young lady that was brought into our centre. She was a prostitute, she was a drug addict, and she had quite a history there in Cabramatta. She did not only mix up her shot of drugs in a little spoon like all the others. She mixed it up in a soup ladle, and she would sometimes lace it with vodka to give it more oomph. She came in, they brought her into my office. I sat down and I started to talk to her, and I wanted to know from which angle I could come in to talk to her and work with her. So I asked her, I said, "Do you believe in a higher power?" She just exploded. She said, "What? God? Never talked to me about God. He's no different to my father that started to sexually abuse me from a very young age." So I decided not to touch that subject again, but to live God to her. And as we continue to work with her, treating her with dignity and respect, as I would treat the Prime Minister of a country. She came in one day in my office about 3 months later. She knocked on the door. I opened the door. She came in. She sat down and she made the following statement. She said, I think that God must look like the people that work in this place. Please introduce me to your God. She had a miraculous deliverance from addiction. But the courts caught up with her because she stopped going to the methadone clinic. She came before the magistrate. The magistrate said, 2 years ago I gave you an option, methadone or prison. Now I'm told that you've stopped going to the methadone clinic. She said, Your Honor, I've met Jesus. He said, I don't care who you met. The option is methadone or prison. She said, Your Honor, I've met Jesus and I've promised him that I will never defile my body again with any addictive agent. With all respect to the court, I choose prison. I was there. I knew that this was enough. Being in prison to send her back into addiction. So I followed her into prison and I visited her there. It was winter. She had the green jumper of the prison on her, and she must have seen the concern on my face, and she smiled and she reached into the back of her jumper and she pulled out the Bible that we had given her. She said, don't be concerned about me. I am here where God wants me to be, because here I am ministering to other girls that used to prostitute with me and do drugs with me. Here I share with them the God that gave me deliverance. Paul says, I become a Jew to the Jews. He continues and he says, to the weak I became as weak that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partakers of it with you. Is he saying that I'm making compromises about truth? That is not what he's saying. He says that there are certain things that does not matter if others see it different to what I see it. He's not talking about truth and principle. I want to give you 10 points how to deal when you are dealing with someone and there's differences. I'm going to go through them hopefully quickly, because I want to end off with a short just reflection on how Jesus dealt with people. The first one is, know what you do not like about yourself. My friends, often there are certain things that we don't like about ourselves that makes us hypersensitive when we see it in other people. And therefore, we need to know that these are the triggers that can trigger us to become reactive when we see it in other people. But that requires of us to be able to be self-aware about ourselves, to know what is our weakness and what is our strength, to know which model am I using, the Hellenistic or the Hebrew model. The second one, and if I'm going too fast and you want this information, I'm happy to share it with you. Happy to make my PowerPoint available to you. The second one is manage yourself. If you and or the other person are getting upset, then manage yourself to stay calm. Speak to the person as if the other person is not upset. You know what Ben Carson says? When the other presidential candidate is jumping around and attacking him, you know what he says he does? He just closes his eyes and in his mind he looks at this fellow and he sees just a beautiful little baby. Takes self-control, doesn't it? Self-control comes from knowing who I am. Knowing who I am comes from using the right model of who is the only one that speaks my worth and my value. Knowing that God alone speaks my worth and my value. I do not need to perform in order to change other people's minds about me. Further, my friends, avoid the use of you, which can appear as blaming. Rather use the word I or we. When I say to my wife, honey, you know, when there's stress between us, I always feel this and this and this way. She can cope with that. But let me just change the wording and I'll say to her, honey, you know, when you act this way, it just brings up certain emotions within me. To which one is she reactive? The moment that I bring in the word you, she reads it as an accusation. And therefore, you need to be in self-control of yourself. You can also nod your head to assure that the person that you are hearing him or her, as they speak, respectfully listen, nod your head as you talk, and maintain eye contact with a person. I must confess something, that sometimes I become so reactive because of the baggage of my own past that just slips past the gates that I've set up. That as my wife or as someone else is still busy telling their story, I already am starting to formulate a defense against what they say. When I do that, here's my question. When I do that, have I truly heard what they said? Nope. I have jumped to conclusions that they are going to say what I think they're going to say, and therefore I'm starting to formulate my own defense. So it's an irrational belief that is going to trip us up. Another is to move the discussion to a private area, if possible. Often, a confrontation happens where? Where does it happen? In the church, in front of others, or where others are around. The pressure is on not only to present my story, but the pressure is also on to defend myself against everyone else that's standing listening. I had the sad experience where a colleague of mine just recently, I was in charge of a program for our ministers, and one of my colleagues took me to task. Completely irrational with what he was accusing me of. Others were standing there wondering what was happening, and I slowly took him to one side. I said, let's go and talk over there. Just that time that we took to move over into another room cooled the situation. And we were able to refocus. I was able to hear his concern and able to assure him that he had jumped to irrational conclusions. Give the other person time to vent. Do not interrupt the person or judge what he or she is saying. Don't roll your eyes. Don't click your tongue. Hear them out. Let them speak. Be respectful in exactly the same way. It might be that they might have the complete wrong impression. That is not the important thing. We feel important when we have something on our heart and we want to talk to someone else, if they would listen to us. Give them the courtesy. Give them the respect that, disregarding the fact whether they're right or wrong, that you will hear them out. Because if you would listen a little bit deeper, will listen not only to the words that they speak, but try to catch the emotion which they share with you, you will in actual fact get to the bottom of what really is troubling them. Therefore, number 5, verify that you are accurately hearing each other. When the other person is done speaking, ask the person to let you rephrase, uninterrupted, what you are hearing to ensure you are hearing it correctly. And my suggestion is here, my friend, that when you rephrase what that person has said, don't just parrot back what the person had said, but try to share the emotion that you caught in that which they have said. I often work with couples, and I allow them for 15 minutes each to just open up and share from their perspective how they view the pathology, the problem that they bring in terms of their relationship. And I sometimes feel as if they just vomit all their problems onto my desk. After each one of them had a chance to share their story, I sort of respectfully scrape away all the emotional vomit away from the desk, so at least I can see them. And then I ask them to turn to each other. Put their kneecaps together so they can be close together. And I ask the one that started to speak to share now with the other one the number one issue that bothers them. I ask the other person not to just hear the words, but to hear the emotion behind what they say and to share it back. And then I ask the first speaker, did your partner really hear what you intended to say? You know what is normally the response? Nope. So rephrase what you had meant. Try to share the actual message that you really want them to hear. And then I ask the one that is listening to repeat the emotion that they hear. And we go through a practice a few times, and it is quite hard. Because, friends, we are so reactive, self-defensive, that we hardly ever can hear what the other one's real intent is. Ask questions for clarification's sake. Don't ask, why? Did I hear you correctly? Are you saying that this, when I act this way, that it make you feel this about you? Clarification questions. Number 6, ask the other person to verify that he or she is hearing you. Describe your perspective. Use I, not you words. Talk in terms of the present as much as possible. Quickly mention your feelings to make it easy for that person to be able to recognize what is the feelings that you're really expressing. My friends, in order to do that, once again, you need to be in self-control. You need to be able to take a deep breath and not attack, but to enter into that conversation in order wanting to win that person over, not just an argument. Number 7, acknowledge where you disagree and where you agree. One of the most powerful means of resolving conflict is to mention where both agree. At least we agree on this point. That is already a step in the positive direction. Number 8, discuss the matter on which you disagree, not the nature of the other person. What do I mean by that? Ask what can be done to fix the problem. Focus on actions you both can do, and ask the other person if they will support those actions. Do not become personal. Have you noticed how you pull your face when you're angry? Look at that frown on your forehead. Becoming personal is going to bring about what? Conflict. You're interfering in that conversation to reach a common goal. Number 9, thank the person for working with you. Whether you've come to the conclusion that both of you agree or disagree on an issue is not the issue. The fact that that person is willing to spend time and work through issues is powerful. And in doing so, you could always come back later on and retake and rework through issues until you reach a conclusion together. Acknowledge and thank the other person for his or her effort. It takes patience for a person to engage in meaningful conversation during conflict. Number 10, if the situation remains a conflict, then consider to agree to disagree. Consider seeking a third party that can help you together to help to see each other's position. And here, my friends, I would like to recommend, if you've got a wise pastor, which you have, and you've got 2 pastors in this church, the old pastor is not here tonight, why don't you sit down, the 2 of you that you have a disagreement with, why don't you sit down with them and ask them to pray with you, even with elders that are God-fearing men. Pray, ask them to guide you, ask them to hear what most probably you're missing in that conversation. If there's a therapist in town that is a God-fearing therapist using biblical therapeutic modality, you can go to such a person as well. Be careful to go to someone that practices humanistic therapy. Because in humanism, all that counts is you, not the other. And that is not the biblical model. That is the Hellenistic model, which is, forgive me to say this, I believe a satanic model. So in marriages, often the humanistic model used by therapists, well, if this marriage doesn't work for you, just step out of it, choose another one. From a biblical perspective, there's very clear guidelines that's given to us. And being a therapist with a Bachelor of Theology degree or a BA Theology plus additional therapy qualifications doesn't make you a Christian therapist. You can be an Adventist pastor and still practice humanism. So my friends, make sure that the person that you work with has chosen that this book is the final authority. This book is what I will weigh modern psychology in, because this becomes the final rule of life, not what I've been taught at university. I want to share with you inspired writing on disagreement. You ready for that? Inspired writing, do we always need to see things the same way? Here it is in Testimonies to the Church, volume 4, page 65. I read the following. She says, the religion of Christ does not require us to lose our identity of character, but merely to adapt ourselves in some measure to the feelings and the ways of others. Many people may be brought together in unity of religious faith, whose opinions and habits and tastes in temporal matters are not in harmony. You know, friends, because we worship together, because we believe in the same Sabbath, because our belief in the state of the dead is exactly the same, doesn't mean that you have to buy an Amarok Volkswagen Amarok Ute and have it white. You can, in actual fact, drive a red Jeep. You can see things in a different way on what kind of food are we going to prepare for the meal on Sabbath. What color of carpet we're going to put in after this one has been used up. The fact that we worship together does not mean that we have to have exactly the same taste. That is what she's saying here. Am I correct? She continues and she says, but if they have the love of Christ glowing in their bosom, in their home, they may have the sweetest and most intelligent communion together, and a unity the most wonderful. If the Spirit of Christ reigns in us and controls our hearts, you can think different to what I think. And you can still be my brother and my sister. You don't have to be a clone of me. I believe that this statement is far more authoritative to everything that I've said so far tonight. So tonight, I would like to conclude with that. One last thought, though, just in closing, on how Christ worked with people. Do you appreciate those little snippets at the end of the night? If you've got your Bible, turn to Mark 1, verse 40 to 45. My friends, these stories I share with my clients. I use it in therapy, but it is also the guide that I guide my work as I deal with people. I want to reflect Jesus Christ through the way that I work with people. I want them to start to love the Jesus that they see reflected in my life. I want my children, I want my wife, I want my grandkids to make a choice in their life that they want to follow the Jesus that they saw in the way that I deal with them. It was not always like that, I have to confess. Mark 1 verse 40, I'll start to read. Now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him and saying to him, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Here's a problem, my friends. Here's something that Mark is leaving out. Lepers do not just walk up to Jesus and implore him, asking him, please heal me. Lepers, in reality, when they are diagnosed with leprosy, they are taken out of the community. Their family will not touch them. If they had not hugged them that morning, they will never get a hug again. Because by touching a leper, you are infecting yourself. So if you have been diagnosed with leprosy, everyone steps away. They do not touch you again. They actually escort you with a little bit of earthly things. They will take you out of town, outside the gates of town. They will make you a makeshift little hut. They will give you some rations of food. They will put some clothing down. And then they will retreat. Because leprosy was the sign, the outward sign that you have committed the unpardonable sin. There was no way back anymore. God has moved away from you. You would be ostracized from the church. The church will not minister to you anymore. You have gone far beyond where grace can ever reach you. So guess what is one of the biggest challenges that these people battle with, is to know how they can come right with God. What was the sin that I've committed that God would punish me in such a terrible way? They would often draw together in communities. Lepers help themselves, help each other. Because initially the family would sometimes come and bring a plate of food, and they would put it down a fair distance away from the leper, and then they would rush away as the leper would come close to pick up the food. The lepers, when there was a light breeze, had to cry out, "Unclean, unclean," when people approached. They could not come closer than 120 feet when there was a slight breeze. So how can a leper just walk up to Jesus, kneel down in front of him and implore him, in other words, plead with him and say, "Lord, heal me"? There's only one way that he can do that. And that is, my friends, that he has been hurt so many times, that he has experienced so many rejections, and he's so hungry for human touch that he did not care that sticks and stones could not hurt him anymore. Because as he would cross that boundary of that 120 feet, people will pick up rocks and stones and hurl it at these lepers. So this man must have come to the point where he didn't care whether they threw him with stick and stones. He made up his mind. He had one last chance. And he just put his head down and he started to run as best as what he could. The crowd started to scream. They yelled at him, "Stay away!" But he kept on coming. And what does the crowd normally do then? The crowd made way. But Jesus did not move with them. Jesus stood still. He held his position, waiting for this man, because Jesus traveled through, what is my sentence? Through the corridors of space and time for this man. And as the crowd scatters in different directions, not to be infected by him, they open a road right up to Jesus. He falls down in front of Jesus. He begs, "Lord, if you will, you can heal me." Listen to the next words that this passage talks about. What happens? Then Jesus moved with what? Moved with compassion. What does it mean, friends? What does these words mean? I go back to the Greek language, the original text in which this passage were written. And the Greek passage says that Jesus' bowels turned. What does that mean? My little granddaughter, her father had walked out on them. I eventually bring them to stay with us in the home. I planted Queanbeyan Church. I'm pastoring Queanbeyan Church. I needed that Sunday to be at the Sabbath school meeting, but my little granddaughter, just two years old, very much attached to her granddad, and her granddad very much attached to her. My little granddaughter starts to show the first signs of whooping cough. My wife it's a small group in our little company. My wife is the Sabbath school superintendent. My daughter helps out in the Sabbath school. I say to my wife, you go, you lead out the committee meeting. There's certain decisions that I will have to sit in with you guys, but I will look after the little one, you guys, and deal with the meeting, because in the evening you don't want that child to go out. About an hour into their meeting, I eventually phoned my wife. I said to her, look, I think our granddaughter is battling to breathe. She's having difficulty to breathe in air. It's as if her chest is closing up. My wife works at Queanbeyan Emergencies. She knows exactly the situation there. She says, get her in the car and race through to Canberra Hospital. Don't go to Queanbeyan. Go immediately straight to Canberra Hospital. And as I take this little one and I put her in the car, she coughs. And as she coughs, she vomits all over me. And as I look at her face, the blood is coming through her eyelids. I freak out. What do I do? At that moment, my wife and my daughter's car pulls into the yard, and we quickly pull a shirt off me, put another shirt on, wipe her off, put her in the car. We race her to Canberra Hospital. They put her into a bed in the emergency ward, and now they need to take blood. But my friends, in relation to a little arm of my little girl, they bring in a massive big pipe to put into a little arm. That's how it feels to me. And as they put the needle in and they try to draw blood, they find nothing. So they half pull it out and they twist it and they turn it in. And her eyes just follows me. And she whimpers. She says, Opa, which is the Afrikaans of granddad. She says, help me. I'm the only male in her life to protect her. And in order to help her, I cannot protect her from what is happening with her arm, with the drawing of blood. But they pull again out the needle a little bit and twist it and push it in again. And I can feel how her body just contracts with pain. She starts to cry, her eyes pleading, Opa, help me. It is a freezing cold winter night. My friends, the inner parts of my bowels start to turn. I feel sick to the core. Every muscle in my body wants to react to help her, to protect her, to save her from the pain. But I need to allow her to go through this in order for them to help her. The sweat just starts to come out on my body. I feel her pain. Double, triple, quadruple what she has. My bowels turns. That is what it means. Jesus was overcome, feeling the pain of this man, feeling his emotion, feeling his rejection, feeling his inner need. I just wonder what would happen if we in his church would have his compassion, his empathy to sinners. Listen to what it says further. He says, then Jesus, moved with compassion, did what? Spoke and healed the man. Right? Is that what the story says? Could Jesus have spoken and healed him? He could. He could even raise the dead. But does he do that? He knows exactly what this man needs. In touching this man, Jesus will contaminate himself with leprosy. But touch is exactly what this man needs. So Jesus, overcome with compassion, reaches out his hand, touches him, and heals him. Oh, my dear friend, Jesus came through the corridors of space and time to be infected by sin for us, to set us free, to make a way out for us. He became infected. He took upon himself your sins and my sins and became sin for us and died on the cross so that we could be healed and restored from the leprosy of sin that is destroying our lives. Tonight, Jesus is inviting you to accept that grace that he is demonstrating and holding out to you. But secondly, Jesus is inviting you to become his hands and his feet, to demonstrate exactly the same grace to the most repulsive, the most broken soul in this town. Are you willing to do it? It doesn't matter where they've been. Jesus had paid the price for them. Let's pray together. Gracious Father, how can we fully understand how heaven felt about us? How can we fully understand the price that heaven was willing to pay for one sinner? Willing to give up the whole of heaven, become man, become a servant, become so subject that he eventually died the cruelest of deaths. Oh, Father, we can understand that Jesus loved us so much, but it is the Gospel of John that says that it was you that loved us so much, that you did not give us the best that heaven had. You actually emptied heaven. You gave everything that you had. When our children hurt and when we have to let go of our children, we actually sacrifice far more than when we hurt ourselves. You gave your Son for me, a sinner, for each one of us. And all that you ask in return is for us to accept that, to respond to that, and to allow that grace to affect our lives to the point where we will become your feet, your hands, your mouth, your eyes, to look around for other broken people, not to judge them, but to demonstrate your grace and your love to them to the point where they also want to follow the Jesus that they saw reflected in our life.